Hi guys, Gareth here at garethkirkland.com. I'm going to do a little video about our histogram. What is the histogram and how do we use it? In my first video I got quite a few requests actually to talk a little bit more about the histogram, and because it's a hugely useful tool for the photographer. And when I'm running my workshops, my guests often are a little bit confused, or sometimes very confused about the histogram. It's sort of, they know it's there somewhere, but they tend to ignore it, and they don't find it useful at all. So hopefully we can change that, because it is an incredibly useful tool. By the way, guys, do come and join me on one of my workshops if you want. We use the histogram throughout the photography weekend a lot, and so it really you'll really get the hang of it and understand what the histogram does. Okay, so the histogram, what is it? Well, let's talk about actually what it's not first of all. This is something that some people get confused with. They think that the histogram in some way is related to the composition of the photo, i.e. what's on the left of the frame is related to what's on the left of the histogram, right, and top and bottom and so on. Not at all. It has no idea what we're taking the picture of. The histogram is just a record of the tonal range of our images. That's to say, from blacks to shadow tones to mid-tones to light tones and to whites and all the tones in between, okay? And this is hugely useful because we need to know basically whether we're taking an underexposed or overexposed photo. And in some situations, often to do with the highlights, we need to know that our highlights are sort of there. We've got the brightest parts of the image, but they're not overexposed. We're not, because once something becomes overexposed, burnt out white, we lose all information. And so however we edit that photo, we can't recover that information, okay? The camera basically is a light recording machine, okay? When we take a picture of a chair, a flower, or whatever it is, the camera actually doesn't know what we're taking a picture of. All it's recording is the light that is falling on the objects that we're taking. So if you look at a camera from that point of view, the histogram is the most detailed way that we can understand what's happening in terms of light on any given photo that we're taking, okay? So it's not related to composition. So on the left, we have our blacks. And so if we're taking, for example, quite a dark photo in the sense where maybe like a shaded stream or something like this, it would be natural that the histogram is sort of going over to the left because we've got more darkish tones. Or if we have an overexposed image, it would be natural that the histogram is pointing to is sort of peaked towards the right. Now, in a sense, there's no good or bad histogram per se. There is only a good or bad histogram related to the image that we're taking. So if it is a shaded stream, it's quite normal that it would be sort of bunched towards the left, all that information on our histogram. And if we, in post-production, dragged the exposure slide and overexposed that image so that it became much more in the middle, most of the information on the histogram, it would sort of lose a sense of this sort of shaded stream, because we know that a stream covered by trees would be quite shady and therefore dark. So it's very important, and when I'm working, I'm constantly checking my histogram, maybe not every image, but once every 5 images, as light changes, as I maybe add different filters. And often what I'm most concerned is, as I mentioned earlier, about the highlights. Okay, so we're going to be looking at a series of images on the computer now, and we'll be going through in detail, some detail, how the histogram relates to those particular images. Okay, see you on the computer. So here we are on my Mac in Adobe Lightroom, which is a fantastic piece of software. And we're going to be just looking at a few images and see how that relates to our histogram. A histogram, you can see me mousing over the histogram top right hand corner. Now, in this histogram, it's in Lightroom. It's showing the RGB red, green, blue channels. Don't worry about that. It's not particularly useful. And on my camera, it's just displayed in grey, which I think is best. And here we have the histogram for this image. This is an unedited image, as this one is, but this next one is using filters, and you can see the huge difference that has made to the image. Look at the histogram, and that one without filters. This is not a particularly good histogram. We've got these 3 peaks here. So what do these peaks relate to on our histogram? Okay, so over here, and it's showing you in Lightroom, this part of the histogram is our blacks. Mouse going over towards the right, it says shadows. Now it says exposure, which is our mid-tones. And then it's saying our highlights. And if we go right to the right, it's showing our whites. Okay? The histogram is like a building block of light information, basically. So the more information there is, or more of the image is in any particular area, say this shadow area, it's a very shadowy image, so there's lots of information in those tones, then the more information, and it builds up like a building block until it goes right the way to the top. And the same for this one, and then all the way to the top, which is in the highlight area. So as I said, it relates nothing to composition. This left hand area bears no relation to the left hand of the frame, or this right to the right hand of the frame. It's purely a record of the tonal range. And what we want to try and achieve in our images is a full tonal range. That's to say, we have our blacks on the left and our whites on the right, and all the midtones in the middle. Now, there's not many midtones in the middle, so this is not a great histogram. And a full tonal range will give you a really nice, contrasty, punchy image. If we flatten that image out, take away the blacks, take away the whites, the image will become more and more sort of subdued and looking a little bit washed out and flat. Okay? So what do these peaks relate to? Okay, so this peak here, okay, is our shadow areas, and this is undoubtedly related to mainly this area, this darkest area, and some bits of these dark tones within the buildings. You can see that I'm mousing over. Okay. The peak in the middle is relating to our buildings and the lighter parts of these buildings. Yeah. And this peak in the right is related to the brighter parts of the image, which is definitely the sky and some of these shop fronts and restaurants here. Okay. Now, if you look at our histogram from the image with filters, we can see that it's a much improved histogram, because basically the peak on the right, which was the sky, has been moved over, darkened down to the left. Okay. The peak that was on the left here, which was this area, has lightened up because this is darkened down, so it allows this area to be better exposed. And the midtones are all sort of now merging, so we've got much more of a sort of continuous peak, which is much sort of healthier histogram. And if we look at the final image, which was a few shots later, 5 or so minutes later, because the scene is darker, it's allowed these areas to become brighter, not through post-production, just within the camera. So that's we normally have a period of about 5-10 minutes in these twilight shots between artificial light and the natural lighting of the sky and the reflection on the water. Okay, so let's look at another histogram. We can see this is slightly peaked over to the left, as it should be. It's a dark scene. If we drag it over to the middle, it's too bright, isn't it? We could say that's technically a better histogram, but for that scene, it's too bright. So we'll just click back to revert. the last history state. Here's another image, okay, shaded stream. We can see histogram or pretty much over to the left, as it should be. Again, shall we try and click and drag our histogram? That should be technically a better histogram, but it's not. It's overexposed because it's the wrong histogram for this particular picture. Now this is quite a useful image because this is really, apart from generally gauging your exposure levels as you're shooting, looking at your histogram, I'm primarily concerned with highlights, because highlights can be a big problem, actually more than if you have too many blacks. Also that is not great if you have too many blacks, but highlights are more difficult to control if there is a problem with them. Now I've got this, you can see this little right box here on the top of the histogram. I've got that ticked, and so if I untick it, this red is showing me possible burnt out highlights. Okay, now it depends where these highlights are. I don't care if we get burnt out white in the middle of this reflection in the water here. I don't particularly care in the sky, even though I am using I think it was a number 6 graduated filter to darken down this area to balance this exposure. Actually, on this image, I used a number 6 filter down to here, and I used a number 3 from the bottom to top, because I was aware that this area of these rocks could potentially be a problem. And if these are totally burnt out white, there is no information, no post-production will bring that information back. So I was very careful about this. Now, but looking at my histogram, and I did this in camera as I was shooting, I could see that this peak, which is our whites, is not going all the way to the top, so that we know that this is not 100% white. And if we mouse over these red areas and looking at our histogram, we can say that the red channel is clipping at 100%, but generally we've got 99.7 in green, blue 98. So we've got information there, and we know that because if we click this and drag the slider all the way down, it recovers information. There's maybe one tiny little spot there that it can't recover, so we'll click back to that. So this is really very, very useful, because it would be tragic to be shooting this lovely scene and then find out later that all the images, even though the histogram might have looked great in terms of being in the mid-tones, that our highlights that we weren't paying attention to are burnt out white. And so we're just going to have these big white patches on these rocks, which we don't want, okay? So that is often the most important thing when I'm looking at my histogram, to check that the highlights, which could be on those rocks, it could be in details in the sky, reflections on water, reflections of light reflected off buildings, are not clipping 100% white, okay? Another image here we can see peak to the left, but that's good, correct for that picture. Now here we have a daytime scene. Now we would expect here to have, you know, we've got our full tonal range from whites to blacks, even though that box is not quite ticked there, but there are whites there. And we would expect to see this really nice unbroken histogram of all these lovely midtones in the middle. We've got a whites on the left, blacks on whites on the right, blacks on the left, full tonal range, lots of midtones and information. And we would expect that because this is a scene at sort of, well, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but a bright image. If we click that down, resembling what, say, the stream picture looked like, it's underexposed, okay? So there we go. That's a brief little thing relating to some images in the histogram. In another video, I'll show you actually how my basic approach to editing. Okay, but that's that for now. Okay guys, well that's that. Bit of a long video, but it's not the easiest thing to explain, so it's worth taking a bit of time, I hope. Hope you haven't fallen asleep. Very, very useful tool, but it's like anything in photography. You just got to get out use it, make it make sense for you, and then it just becomes second nature. And before you know it, it takes a second to be flicking through, checking Histogram, fine, all's good. Let's go. Okay, so check out my website, garethcurtin.com. Got pictures there, more videos, more to come. And do come and join me on a workshop. All right, guys, take care. Bye.